So this is a different kind of video than I'm used to making, but I've seen plenty of people complain about the performance of Monster Hunter Wilds, which is understandable. It's not very well optimized, but one mistake I seem to keep seeing people make, though not everyone, is setting the game to Ultra preset at their highest resolution, which, as you'll see, there are ways to get similar visual quality at lower settings and get much better performance. To start, the bottom left is 1440p set to the Ultra preset with no other changes. The top left is 1440p with lowered settings. The top right is 1080p with the same lowered settings but with one setting changed, and the bottom right is 1080p with Ultra preset but without upscaling and instead having FXAA plus TAA. I don't use FSR-AA as it looks marginally better but lowers the performance even more. To note, none of the four are using frame gen, as I know most people wouldn't want them, especially since FSR frame gen isn't very good compared to Nvidia, and the same applies with the upscaling, so if you have an Nvidia card, you could possibly get better image quality than I have in this test. Most people consider the PC I have to be a mid-range GPU and CPU, so take that as you will, so if you have the same or similar, I hope this video will be helpful. Also, quick self-promotion, but I'm releasing a video this Wednesday about a Monster Hunter World randomizer I did, so if you find that interesting, a like and a sub would be pretty neat. It's in preparation for Monster Hunter Wilds. Some settings changes are much more obvious, like depth of field and texture quality from very high to just high. However, the other settings I won't go over until the very end of the video, so as I want to show you the comparison between them visually to see if you deem it worth the visual difference for the performance difference, which in my opinion it is better because you get better performance. And while you might point out that there are some obvious differences between the four different videos, you have to remember, you're not playing Monster Hunter for the ultra high quality graphics, but for the hunting of monsters. So a few settings being lowered here and there shouldn't impact the actual hunting experience, but actually improve it due to having higher frame rates. You'll see later in one scene that the settings do indeed make quite the difference in performance, but I'm going to let the whole thing play out so you can see the whole thing side by side, including the reviews at the end. I do know it's harder to see some things regarding pixel quality due to there being 4 videos on screen, but I felt like not wasting your time by doing it in 2 or more goes, as the benchmark can be long, and I'll provide the settings at the end of the video so that you can try them out yourself in the benchmark. Here's a more obvious one, but also not at the same time, the sky/cloud quality. The only difference I can notice is when they're first being rendered in, as it's a lot more precise on highest, but after they're rendered, they're just barely sharper, so I think lowering them is ultimately worth it. Also, I'm not staring at the sky to play the game. Here I'm going to pause on full screen each scene individually to show the quality of the picture in its most demanding part of the benchmark before letting them play out so you can see the performance difference. After this scene though, there's not much left in terms of bad performance except for the small town, which is CPU intensive instead of GPU intensive like the part in the field, so there's not much I can do personally to improve the performance there. But it's a town, so it doesn't matter as much as you don't need the reaction time like you would on a hunt. Also, this was recorded using the built-in AMD recording, as recording with OBS drastically lowers performance. Here also shows that the benchmarks can vary in length, resulting in differences in score even if you do the same settings, which is really odd, but since it's the end, there's not much reason to try to resync them. And now that the benchmark is over, 1440p Ultra got 25,762 with an average FPS of 75.59, and the lowest shown on screen was 46. 1440p custom settings got 28,569 with an average FPS of 83.86 and a lowest of 57. 1080p with Ultra FXAA plus TAA got 29,513 with an average score of 86.45 and a lowest of 57 also. 1080p custom settings got 29,981 with an average FPS score of 87.97 and a lowest of 65. Now for the settings change. As said before, these settings are the same at both 1440p and 1080p with only one difference, that being 1440p is on FSR balanced and 1080p is on FSR quality. So the changes are ray tracing off, texture quality on high. Also, the very high setting texture pack is a separate downloadable once the whole game comes out, which adds an extra 75 gigabytes. So if you don't want that, just use high textures because they're already included with the game. Fur quality you could turn down as there's not much of a difference, but I kept it on high. Sky quality at lowest as explained later. Sand and snow quality after medium makes very little changes you won't notice in the heat of combat, so I kept it at medium. Render distance is still at highest. Shadow quality is on high, as the jump in performance from high to highest isn't really worth it in my opinion. Hot take, I did some side-by-side testing on the beta with high and low shadow distance quality, and I personally found I thought the low looked better than high, but I did not end up recording it. Ambient light quality at medium, as high does look better, but you won't really notice it in the heat of combat, and it does lower performance. Ambient occlusion is iffy in my opinion, as off looks weird in some cases, but if you have it turned on, there's a weird ghosting left behind the hunter, so it's all up to user preference. I keep it at medium as it looks better than off, but high only looks a little bit better. SSSS scattering is one I'd actually suggest turning off, as I found, in some areas, the game actually looks worse with it on. Like inside this cave, it looks like everything is just made out of oobleck instead of rocks. Depth of field is something I'd just prefer to have off, maybe you want it on. Volumetric fog, I could only notice a slight difference in the beta, but high, once again, looks barely any different, so I just keep it at low. And that's it. It looks relatively similar to Ultra settings, but with up to 10 more FPS in the testing I did. If you found this helpful, a like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated, and with that, have a good day and a good night.